Matt Reeves' Batman is a striking creative vision, delivering a version of Batman that is both grounded and nightmarish. The action is rough and intimate, making full use of the Dark Knight's metal-plated costume and some new takes on classic gadgets to turn the tides of combat in his favor. Gotham City is smothered by corruption and despondency as our hero's 2-year-long crusade to continue his parents' mission, in his own way, has only exacerbated tensions between law enforcement and the criminal element. The environment is often soaked in either rain or the light of a rising or setting sun, lending to an ominously red and black color palette. The cinematography makes use of shallow focus and blurred lights in the background to give the final product an immersive and grimy feel. Shot composition always has thought put into it, and the film's entire visual style clearly took careful consideration. And the performances are resoundingly strong, with special credit going to Colin Farrell's Penguin, who stole every scene he was in. Bruce himself fits perfectly into this bleak world, with Robert Pattinson's intense and tortured depiction of the Batman further distinguishing him from what came before. This film is a redefining of the character, an interpretation that leverages your knowledge of other Batmen to portray this one as especially convincing. A culturally aware film in a culturally aware era which seeks to engage the viewer in a serial killer's demented game of cat and mouse and allow them to experience a living, breathing, decaying world from the perspective of a vigilante not yet versed in the nuances of crime fighting. Our hero is rough around the edges, still learning and adapting as situations often don't go his way, and struggling to balance his crime-fighting alter ego with his real-life persona of a wealthy public figure. But is Batman his alter ego, or is Bruce Wayne actually the mask he wears? Better than most, this story portrays a Batman who is so totally committed to his goals that he sacrifices his social life and philanthropy for a narrow vision of success. The Batman is artistic in the best way possible, but all of that splendor cannot compensate for a shambling screenplay, a sea of conveniences, and by the end, an utter lack of catharsis. A cohesive creative endeavor with a fractured plot beneath. Whatever merit this film carries is simply not enough to make up for a story that stretches plausibility at the best of times and essentially misunderstands Batman at the worst of times.
Hey, Lieutenant, you really okay with this? What about chain of evidence?
He's wearing gloves.
This Batman is so rough around the edges that he seems to have been trained in the Looney Tunes school of martial arts. His plan A for getting a meeting with the Penguin is to walk in through the Iceberg Lounge's front door, knocking heads with security as he does. This is not the sly, cunning, stealthy Batman we're used to. And his second infiltration is no better. He walks in the front door, beats up the guard who happens to take notice of him, and walks headfirst towards a barrage of gunfire. But Lumo, he cut the power and waited till he was inside to get into costume. Okay. And the film establishes that he can navigate obstacles by means of ascension, descension, and demolition. The room he's trying to access has a window just begging to be smashed, which he would have scoped out the last time he was in there. Not only is this entrance not stealthy, it demonstrates a lack of ingenuity and foresight on his part. But let's not skip over his tanking a hail of gunfire from multiple shooters with no negative consequences. None of the bullets ricochet to hit his exposed mouth or the goons packed tightly around him. It's a thrilling visual, but how does Batman fit into it? His armor is supposed to be a last resort, a safeguard against damage he couldn't otherwise avoid with stealth or by outwitting his opponents. Putting aside how ridiculous it is that none of the goons think to aim for his face or fall victim to their own spraying and praying, this isn't a Batman moment. Sponging tons of bullets while advancing on the enemy is something far more at home in an Iron Man or even Superman story. How far are we going to stretch the argument that because this is an early chapter in Batman's life, his crude tactics and errors in judgment are not only forgivable, but justified? How heavily do we want to rely on "he's just starting out" to defend choices which would absolutely result in death, whether it be his own or the deaths of those around him? This is perhaps the coolest shot in the film, but at what cost? Seconds earlier, he and Penguin were engaged in a high-speed pursuit surrounded by vehicles with people in them. The carnage that leads to Batman ramping through the flames and toppling Penguin's car, which absolutely should have killed him, is facilitated by how many dozens of civilian deaths, whose burning corpses are restyled into a backdrop for a hero known to live by a strict no-killing rule. Does the film at least acknowledge his infamous code?
Cross that line. You'll become just like him. Don't throw your life away.
Well, it's something, I guess. Of all the potential routes he had into Gotham Square Garden, why choose to demolish the glass ceiling? How many people did he only further endanger by taking the time necessary to plant all those explosives around the roof? Look at the massive glass shards and debris made by his entrance. Forget about all the rest for a moment and just look at this single piece of glass. That right there is enough to give someone below the Final Destination treatment, and Batman could not care less. The majority of people in here are hapless civilians, and he directly threatens all of their lives by using that many explosives. Again, what happened to the shadowy rogue that dispatches of most of his enemies with ease before some of them even know anything is wrong? But Lumo, this is only year 2 Batman. He's still learning the ropes. With 20 seconds left on the clock, Batman opts to get closer to the bomb-toting DA, and despite his refusal to out the rat in the Maroni case, does nothing to, in any way, mitigate the mortal danger he and the victim are in. Either Batman simply doesn't have the appropriate tools in his utility belt for this occasion, or he doesn't care to try to save the DA's life. He was staring directly at the bomb when it went off, his eyes and jaw fully exposed to the blast, and yet suffers no permanent damage from the hellfire and shrapnel it let loose. The DA was disintevaporated, but as far as the Bat is concerned, that might as well have been a tranquilizer bomb. There is not a snowball's chance in hell that those cops wouldn't have unmasked Batman before he woke up. And what, Gordon was the only one sticking up for him? Gordon. All reliable. The Bat's inside man. He's even more of a Dark Knight simp than the Riddler is. When Batman begins his epic chase with Penguin, Gordon is left behind an unarmored car with nothing but a pistol against a platoon of gunmen carrying fully automatics. And this abandonment is never addressed. Gordon's entire job seems to revolve around playing defense for this brutal vigilante, shielding him from police scrutiny, taking punches so he can get away clean, and fending off hordes of gunmen while Batman leaves to play Just Cause with Gotham City. I don't even know where to start with Riddler, so real quick, from memory, can you tell me what his plan was? Answer: it's to take revenge on Gotham's elite for their involvement in the renewal conspiracy, which diverted funds out of the hands of those in need and straight into the pockets of a handful of fat cats. But that was an easy one. Can you recall what Riddler's motivation was? Because, in all honesty, I'm still struggling to wrap my head around it. A central theme of the film is that Batman helped create the very threat he faces in the climax.
I'm vengeance. I'm vengeance.
The Riddler and his minions admit to being inspired by the Bat's brand of no-nonsense vigilante justice. And at the tail end of a 3-hour movie, I'm inclined to let that reasoning slide, but looking back, the pieces simply don't add up. From the get-go, Batman rejects Riddler's approach as the antics of a madman, but Riddler only realizes that after he's been arrested. It's awfully convenient, then, that Batman gives Riddler no impression of opposing his agenda in their first text chat. The most he does is ask whether Riddler's victim is alive or dead, which could either give Riddler the impression that Batman is getting cold feet in their collaborative efforts, or excite Riddler as it seems that Batman wants to take a more active role in the scheme. The plot relies on this ambiguity in order to play out the way that it does, but it's never addressed by the characters. Almost like they don't want you to think about it. Yes, we're coming back to the scene because it poses nothing but problems for the story. Besides Batman not even trying to save the DA and miraculously surviving the blast, if Riddler knew that he just blew up the Dark Knight, surely he's panicking on his side of the call because he was under the impression that he and the Bat were partners in this plot. As far as Riddler is concerned, he wouldn't want Batman anywhere near that explosion and would be dismayed at the news that he was victim to it. He could have killed his accomplice and role model. But that glaring conflict of interests is never addressed by the characters. Almost like they don't want you to think about it. But let's not forget that Bruce Wayne was another target in Riddler's revenge plot. And for what? Why would Riddler target Bruce to begin with? His mother, Martha Wayne, was in and out of mental institutions as a result of her own childhood trauma, and Thomas Wayne made a deal with Falcone to disappear the journalist who was going to expose it. What does that have to do with Bruce? Riddler couldn't kill Thomas himself, so he'll settle for Bruce's compensation? I thought Riddler was calculated crazy, not flat out deranged. But the evidence is quickly stacking up in favor of an insanity plea. Riddler's endgame was to bomb and flood the city, and he thought the masked vigilante trying to clean up the streets would be on board with that goal? His plan affects Gotham's elite the least. If he's trying to fight for the little guy and take retribution for the renewal conspiracy, this is the worst course of action he could have taken next to bombing civilians themselves. The city's 1% are insulated from tragedies like this. He's only making things worse for the very people previously disenfranchised by renewal. Throughout the film, we get glimpses of parallels between Riddler and Batman. The excerpt that Gordon reads from Riddler's journal is a direct mirror of Batman's opening narration, wherein they both detail what they must become in order to effect change according to their own unique visions, both of which are based on their traumatic pasts. Batman and Riddler are not the same, but the film does its diligence in demonstrating how one would realistically be inspired and motivated by the other. Batman realizes that, in the wake of the destruction to Gotham's infrastructure, crime will be worse than ever. It's not enough that he strike fear into the hearts of his enemies. He must also give hope to the people of Gotham in this dark time. He learns to use his platform responsibly. A noble attempt at a meaningful resolution to this story, but I have eyes and a working memory, so despite all the cues I'm getting to feel uplifted by this point, there are too many alarms ringing in my head for me to ignore, such as Batman's relationship with GCPD. It makes no sense. His partnership with them is never properly defined, so every interaction he has with police is wildly unpredictable, yet always sees Batman come out on top. The Caped Crusader is so early in his crime-fighting career that many still believe him to be an urban legend, and yet these cops tolerate his interference in an active crime scene, and then some, because one detective vouches for him. We don't know how many of the cops are dirty. He doesn't know how many of the cops are dirty. The movie makes clear that not all the cops are dirty. But what's stopping the dirty cops that are there from exploiting Gordon's relationship with Batman for their own gain? This police force inhabits a comically corrupt city and is comprised of a significant amount of corrupt members. But that corruption doesn't carry any weight in the narrative. If anything, we're shown that when push comes to shove, Batman can rely on GCPD for assistance. But what reason do these cops have to cooperate with him? To be fair, the riddles are addressed to Batman. But there are proper channels for police to utilize in order to involve a masked vigilante in their investigation, which I doubt include allowing him access to a fresh crime scene. And Commissioner Loeb does protest having Batman present, meaning that Gordon didn't bother getting his superior's permission before inviting him. We're off to a shaky start, but there is so much more. During an active bomb threat, the prime victim of which being the district attorney, the police do not attempt to take control of the situation once Batman enters the picture. As soon as he steps out of the shadows, the cops assume the role of spectators, and for all intents and purposes, Batman is running the show. DA blows up, Bat is knocked out, and we transition to GCPD where upon waking up, he wails on multiple cops and shows no signs of remorse. It's a badass moment, but his punching Gordon and subsequent escape from the building should leave the police with no goodwill for him. In their eyes, this incident proves Batman is a dangerous and uncooperative brute. By now, Batman has tampered with a crime scene, interfered in a bomb situation, leading to the DA's death, and assaulted several police officers before resisting arrest and fleeing authorities. His reputation with the cops should be in the mud, but the next time they show up, as in, when the plot reminds you that they exist, they take no note of the Bat and are solely concerned with arresting Falcone. But even then, this dunce is not concerned that Batman broke into another active crime scene and made no effort to stop him from tearing up the carpet.
Hey, whoa, what are you doing? What are you doing?
Let me ask you this, dear viewer. What does Batman achieve in this movie? More specifically, of all the events and developments which constitute the plot of the film, what did Batman himself initiate and accomplish versus what passively happened to and around him? He's pretty good at solving riddles, which I don't consider high praise for the world's greatest detective, but hey, if he had to put something on his resume. It was through his own cunning that he and Alfred found the clue that led him and Gordon to the thumb drive, which in turn led Batman to the Iceberg Lounge. But upon infiltrating the club and getting acquainted with the Penguin, Selina Kyle walks in. Batman sees the boots from the photo of Annika on Selina, and she sees the photo of Annika on the table, tipping them both off simultaneously. Imagine if a different barmaid served Penguin here. Imagine if no one interrupted their discussion. What lead would Batman have without her random but extremely timely entrance? This singular event is what sets the plot on its needed course and not an entirely different one. He follows Selina home, where Annika tells her that her passport is in Mitchell's safe, leading Batman to confront her in the mayor's apartment. Selina won't reveal what's got Annika so spooked though, because she doesn't know herself, and when they both go back to Selina's place, Annika has been taken along with Selina's phone and therefore also the dirty little secret she was so fearful about, that Falcone is the rat to whom Riddler keeps alluding. Playing on the news, conveniently, is Commissioner Loeb's death tape, which neatly sets up the rat maze torture device containing the next clue. The letter, which reads, "Bring him into the light and you'll find where I'm at." A riddle Batman did not solve in time to save Falcone, but honestly, I don't blame him. Most of the riddles seem to take some form of connect the dots, but this one is more akin to read my mind or it sucks to be you. Good thing for the Bat that the plot is puppeteering him every step of the way, so no such feat of cognitive skill is necessary. Despite losing her girlfriend moments ago, Selina is oddly collected when Batman tells her she's going to help him. So, he sends her into the Iceberg Lounge wearing one of his nifty camera contact lenses where she just so happens to bump into the district attorney. Being the man of culture he is, he invites Selina to sit down, and I'm not joking when I say it takes him less than a minute to start spilling his guts about the notorious rat. He just met this chick, and their entire conversation doesn't even last 90 seconds, during which time he rattles off Riddler, Informant, Maroni, and drops. Everything Batman wants and needs to hear to progress his investigation. The DA could have hit contrivance bingo if he'd also mentioned renewal hush money street lamp. But the lady of the night alongside him got Selina's attention by bringing up Annika's disappearance. So we are once more pulled away from the issue at hand by a distraction, which will inevitably be seized by another distraction ad infinitum. It seems to be a running theme with this flick. Anyway, Batman fills Gordon in about the informant in the Maroni case being the same rat Riddler keeps prattling on about, Alfred hands Bruce the solution to the rat maze cipher, and then we're at the funeral scene. A commotion outside gives way to a rampaging car, from which the DA exits, after having been taken by the Riddler last night, but not before he could tip off Batman and Selina to what they needed to— I feel like I'm watching Tenet again.
That's unknowable.
Bruce leaves, Batman returns, and you know how the rest goes.
Riddle me this. What's dead? You!
What I'd like to call your attention to, before we go any further, is just how passive Batman has been up until now. Selina's convenient entrance, Alfred's solving of the cipher, the DA's generous exposition and punctual crashing of the funeral. All of this happens to Batman, he initiates none of it. The most he's done is find the thumb drive and read a few of Riddler's gift cards, which, without the advent of these cosmic coincidences, would get him nowhere. He gets handed the answers to his questions. The passage of the plot does not depend on the actions of its main character. He is on a rail-guided tour of the script, and what little he does set in motion and accomplish is either ancillary or treated with the same significance as the events over which he had no control.
I wish I could say I'm making a difference.
I feel the same way, my dude. Batman and Gordon follow Penguin and his goons to a drug lab, where Selina is also searching for answers. Neither Bat nor Cat are looking for Annika, but they do find her, and before either of them can react to this, the death of an important character in his investigation and her personal life, gunshots ring out, depriving us of what could have been meaningful character development for them both. Maybe even a hint of chemistry for them. Something. Anything that fills in the blank between their meeting and their kissing. Besides being Robert Pattinson, what attraction or connection does Selina have to Batman? The fear Batman instills in criminals is contrasted with the fear Falcone instills in his cronies should they reveal him as the Rat. The DA, Mackenzie, and Loeb all fear what Falcone will do to their families owed to his reputation, while Batman is creating a reputation for himself by striking fear into street-level criminals. Considering Falcone is Selina's father and she's not on the best of terms with him, the film gives us more reason to believe that she would be repulsed by the Batman than infatuated with him.
All anyone cares about in this place are these white, privileged assholes.
Frankly, I cringe, Mr. Mayor.
Her very interest in Batman is yet another example of a reward being handed to him after minimal effort. This Batman is so passive that everything from danger to success to fun to survival finds him no matter how hard he tries to ignore and defy them. During the chase scene, the vehicles left in the wake of Penguin's destruction drop a ramp at the perfect moment for Batman to make use of it, sparing him, but not the drivers of those cars, a fiery demise and securing the epic shot. This Batman is not nearly as intelligent as the film would like you to believe. He's good at solving riddles, I'll give him that, but he couldn't figure out the URL connection in time to spare these people their lives, so excuse me for being stingy with my compliments. Alfred handing Bruce the solution to the rat maze cipher is the first mention of El Rata Alada. The funeral crashing, the DA exploding, the escape from GCPD, and the car chase all happen before Penguin tips Batman off that URL Rata Alada might have a double meaning.
Oh, you're really not as smart as I thought you were.
Riddler's ensuing riddle leads to an old orphanage where it becomes clear that Bruce Wayne himself is the next target, but it's okay because apparently Alfred has a habit of opening Bruce's mail for him. Now faced with another roadblock as he doesn't understand what, if anything, the Gotham Renewal Fund has to do with the Riddler's killings, he spends an inordinate amount of time shuffling around furniture and vandalizing his nice floor just to find the information he's looking for in a filing cabinet under Renewal. Before he can even get started combing through the files, the plot pulls him aside, again, and when he gets back to the cave one scene later, the news is playing a video made by Riddler explaining exactly what he needs to know. All of this detective work was just for show. Batman didn't even get the chance to deduce something. All the information necessary to progressing the plot is dropped in his lap, and they definitely don't want you to think about that. But the worst offense of all has got to be the carpet tucker.
Oh, my uncle's he's an installer. Oh, it's a tucker.
After Riddler is apprehended and they get access to his apartment, Batman's attention is drawn to a caged bat. In the cage with the bat is a tool. A cop suggests it's some kind of prying instrument, to which Batman responds that it is what Riddler used to kill Mayor Mitchell. This is a unique murder weapon, attached to a letter inside a cage with a bat, placed there by a guy who calls himself the Riddler. The letter reads, "My confession," and although Batman understands that Riddler isn't through toying with him yet, the plot pulls him away from the pertinent question so that he can begin to dread the possibility that Riddler knows his true identity and plans to reveal it to the world.
You're a good cop.
The pertinent question being, why a carpet tucker? Every clue leading up to this has had some kind of double meaning or deeper significance than a surface-level interpretation would offer. Batman needs to miss the relevance of the tool until someone explains it to him, because if he had realized what it was for in this scene, instead of after Riddler taunted him in Arkham, the third act would have played out very differently. The film could just as easily have ended with Batman and the GCPD racing to disarm the bombs around the city before they went off. Or, any other possible ending that doesn't rely on Batman's failure as a detective. Whichever way you look at it, this climax is bizarrely contrived and its stakes artificial. It's an inconsistent escalation of terrorism on the Riddler's part, and yet another baffling writing choice for Batman's character. World's greatest detective, and he doesn't know what a carpet tucker is. He's enough of a craftsman and engineer to customize his suit, gadgets, and car, but this little doohickey will be his downfall. Which excuse are we going with this time? He was distracted by the possibility of his identity being revealed? It's class commentary that a cop whose uncle is a carpenter needed to point out the significance of the murder weapon to him? A trust fund baby? Or the classic, he's only been doing this for 2 years. Why does this story seem to have such a problem with Batman achieving? Why does he himself accomplish so little? The main antagonist, the big bad, the villain of the film, turns himself in. Batman never busted the Riddler. And for what? Why does this plot play out as though the writers were making it up as they went along? The film can't decide if Riddler is a calculated genius or stark raving mad. This whole time, he was under the impression that he and Batman were in cahoots. He got himself arrested for the express purpose of meeting Batman face to face so that they could revel at the results of their work together from behind bars? Was this guy born without any self-preservation instinct, or does he like prison life? Riddler could have set up a meeting with Batman so that they could enjoy the flooding of the city together without being arrested and sent to an asylum. There was the perfect opportunity to, say, have the bombs cause the city to flood, have Riddler take in the spectacle from somewhere safe and free, and for him to invite Batman to join him in celebration through a code or riddle or something, which would give Batman the opportunity to tell him off for his insane scheme and arrest Riddler himself. A logical plot development which gives the main character agency? What am I thinking? What we got instead was a tornado of miscommunication and conveniences which, for some unknowable reason, saw Batman put the pieces of the puzzle together precisely too late to prevent the bombings, Riddler contrive a plan to impress Batman which relies on Batman not participating in its enactment, and the GCPD ignore Batman's myriad infringements of the law so that these two could talk face to face in Arkham, where Riddler put himself because he thought it would make a good spot from which to watch Gotham burn. My PC crashed while I was typing this out. I can't imagine what was going through Matt Reeves' head at the pitch meeting. I've covered the most major issues I have with the film, but the more I look, the more I find. Gordon, why put the serial killer's USB in your own laptop? We are decades into the computer era. Basic safety protocols by which police would be more likely to abide would entail using a secure device with no internet connection, camera, or microphone so that something exactly like this would not happen. And since the snuff films on the drive are sent from Gordon's personal email, the public may get the impression that the cops are okay with that footage being out there during an ongoing investigation, on top of the fact that serial killers love this type of publicity. Bird brain move, and Batman should have spoken up beforehand. Not taking those basic precautions is an even bigger problem considering this is a Batman story. Imagine what could have happened if they put the drive in the Batcomputer. Also, they totally jumped the gun with the Joker. I adore Barry Keoghan as an actor, so reducing both him and the character of the Joker to a tacked-on cameo in a film that's already pushing its luck in terms of runtime leaves a bad taste in my mouth. He's there for long enough to make a good impression, but not so long that his inclusion in the story is justified. Having the Joker in your movie is not automatically a win. The Joker, of all characters, not only needs but deserves purpose. You can call it whatever you want. A teaser, an Easter egg, fan service. I call it shameless key jangling. If you clapped when you saw him, you're part of the problem. And what if the riddles have multiple viable solutions? What if, with Batman's encyclopedic knowledge of wordplay and world trivia, he answers a riddle with something plausible but incorrect all the same? It wouldn't break the story, but it would be pretty awkward.
Riddle me this, Batman. What is long, hard, and has cum in the middle?
A penis.
No, the answer is cucumber!
Before writing this script, I really thought I'd be reaching for things to criticize, which is testament, I think, to how most people engage with movies, at least on our first viewing. We go in without expectations, suspend our disbelief, and hope that we enjoy it. But I left the cinema deflated. I wanted a good movie, and although I couldn't articulate it then, although I just couldn't put my finger on what was so disappointing about the Batman, I knew that I didn't enjoy it. One reason I value criticism of continuity and internal consistency rather than spectacle, themes, or emotion is that by assuming that what the film shows you is the only way those events could have played out, you are giving the filmmaker license to do anything. The writers and director could get away with murder, I mean that literally and figuratively, if the audience suspends their disbelief to the point that they don't question anything. Yes, I can see it happened that way in the film. I'm not denying or questioning that it happened, I'm criticizing it for happening that way. I am here to take no one's enjoyment of the film away. If you truly enjoyed the Batman, then no amount of criticism, fair or otherwise, should be able to change your mind. I love James Gunn's Suicide Squad. I watched it 3 times in the span of a week. But that story is a mess. I'd put it roughly on par with the Batman overall, but I actually enjoyed the Suicide Squad and no one can take that away from me. I have issues with it, but I have no problem separating those from my emotions regarding the movie. Its merits and shortcomings need not have any effect on how I feel during the experience of watching it. I don't believe that every piece of media should conform to subjective or objective standards of review, just that we as discerning members of the audience should be able to distinguish between I liked that because it made me feel good, and that was a good movie and here's why. And if you're sitting there right now asking, Lumo, why can't you just let me enjoy movie? What do you think I was asking myself the entire time writing this? I went into the cinema wanting to enjoy it. It's Batman. Of course I wanted to like it. But Lumo, how could you be disappointed if you went in with no expectations? Listen, dudes. When I go to a burger joint for a meal, I don't expect to be served a hunk of charcoal covered in gray paste on wet bread. I don't expect every burger to be as good as a Krabby Patty, but I'm not convinced that it's unreasonable to point out a turd sandwich when I taste one. I wasn't captivated by the characters, enthralled by the action, or intrigued by the story. I was bored. And there's a part of me that can't help but think that so many people are singing the Batman's praises because of the combination of superhero movie fatigue and the industry's distinct decline over the past few years. Or the fact that it's the newest thing and novelty bias plays more of a role in people's opinions than they're willing to admit. In many ways, the Batman is refreshing and entertaining, but simply wanting an escape from the tidal wave of preachy, uncreative, lowest common denominator garbage that pervades modern cinema doesn't make it good. It's clear that the intention of including Batman falling short in so many ways was to illustrate a starting point for the character, a foundation on which the following films will build, and I do look forward to seeing what this version of The Dark Knight shapes up to be. But you cannot tell me with a straight face that all of these mistakes were accounted for in the writer's room. The film fools you into perceiving this as a more realistic interpretation of Batman, with strong performances and excellent direction, while simultaneously screaming in your face how unbelievable all this is. This film establishes an inhumanly resilient Batman, one whose plan A is the direct approach because he's not worried about being harmed. A stark contrast to the character we know to rely on outthinking and outskilling his opponents because, ultimately, he is just a man. As vulnerable to pain as the rest of us, but well equipped and trained to compensate for that. No amount of training would prepare a human for this amount of physical trauma.
Do you bleed?
The film suffers from John Wick bullets. They have no impact beyond the immediate contact point and defy basic laws of physics. Some characters seem to be all but immune to crashing at breakneck speeds, while others fall to a simple 1-2 punch, and as long as Batman wears that suit, the plot treats him as though he's wearing sci-fi force field armor. It is a unique approach to the idea of Batman, familiar enough that the main character resembles Batman superficially, but taking so many creative liberties that once you go any deeper than that, he looks like a failed Elseworld character brought to the silver screen. This Batman parades around Gotham as though he's doing real detective work while all the heavy lifting is done by the invisible hand of the writer. This Batman is not only defined by his anger and fear, but he lets it get the better of him to the detriment of those around him.
I thought I'd mastered all that.
Really? I thought mastery entailed a degree of control and composure. I can't tell if it's Bruce himself or the people behind the scenes who've confused power for prowess. He makes no effort to balance his vigilantism with his philanthropic endeavors, and entirely disregards the irresponsible playboy persona which is integral to keeping his identity a secret. If it never occurred to this man to use his wealthy delinquent alter ego as a disguise for his true, visceral, life-threatening crusade as a vigilante, then this is not Batman. We get no impression of his philosophy as a heroic icon besides a few throwaway lines which he himself undermines with his own actions.
They think I'm hiding in the shadows. But I am the shadows.
Batman is not a character who wallows in despair and invites the audience along for the ride. He's a tortured soul who channels his horrible trauma in order to be a force for good. A young man who used his riches to travel the world, learning from the best and brightest in their respective fields. Martial arts, driving, flying, sailing, psychology, chemistry, criminology. The moment Bruce Wayne invented Batman was the moment all the pieces fell into place. The philosophy of Batman is not something he picked up in the field after years of wasting time bludgeoning crooks to make himself feel better in a blackout frenzy. It's the foundation of his journey, a mindset that informed Bruce's choice to don a bat-themed costume in the first place. The combat choreography is decent, and the camera doesn't cut as often as is common with modern action blockbusters, but that isn't necessarily to the film's benefit. We've seen examples of filmmakers who've used frenetic editing to great effect in portraying Batmen who are authentically skilled but also frighteningly fast and overwhelmingly agile. If the goal was combat clarity, the Batman did a fine job, but in terms of raw power and intimidation, it's been done better before. I'll leave it up to you. Tell me what feels more like Batman.
Where are you?
Let's be honest here. It would have been more fitting if this character killed his enemies, having the story acknowledge the trail of bodies he leaves in his wake. Then, not only would his change of heart at the end of the film regard the fear he uses as a tool against Gotham's criminals, but also the lives he has taken and can never get back. We could have gotten a Batman for whom rage and vengeance are so normal that he doesn't care about the lives of the people in his way, as well as his own, only to then realize that in order to make a positive change in the city, he needs to be a beacon of hope, work more closely and on better terms with the police, and not act as judge, jury, and executioner. That not killing criminals, no matter how far gone they are, is the best way to operate moving forward. Instead, we got a Batman who mercilessly maims thugs, talks about not killing or using guns or stooping to their level, and then wreaks havoc that would undoubtedly result in the deaths of dozens of innocents involved. My Batman doesn't kill. But I'll be the first to admit that no cinematic depiction of the Dark Knight has truly lived up to the code. Whether incidental or deliberate, big screen Batman has racked up quite the kill count. Accurately adapting a comic book character with decades of canon and a versatile ethos into film form can be quite challenging, but at the end of the day, whether the character we see on screen embodies the essence of the icon we've come to revere or not depends on execution. It's true that no other depiction of Batman has honed in on and displayed with such care the pathological side of his life, but look at what they sacrificed to achieve that. Look at what Matt Reeves gave Batman to work with. No outwitting of his opponents, but a whole lot of ham-fisted hand-throwing. No impressive detective work, but a masterful comprehension of riddle-solving. No stealthy entrances or smooth exits, and no camaraderie with his last living family member. The man who taught Bruce how to fight and who has stuck by his side through a years-long self-destructive episode.
You have only one servant?
He's not a servant.
He's a friend.
This character, this man who flinches at the slightest bit of sun, obsesses over his sadistic pastime, and cuts himself off from social interaction, is an interesting character, and I wouldn't mind seeing more of him, but it's not Batman. Robert Pattinson does not have the X factor, and this script does him no favors.
The first time I put it on, I mean, you can feel the kind of 80 years of all the different writers and artists and actors and directors. Everybody's put so much kind of love and passion into it, and you really feel it when you put it on, and it's always a bit of a shock when you look in the mirror.
Putting aside his unintimidating stature, frail voice, and the fact that he threw a tantrum after realizing that being Batman isn't a walk in the park, what we see of him on screen is not as intense and compelling as it is moody and pathetic.
Stop. You're not my father.
They chose to include that in the final cut of the film. They chose to keep it in.
When you think about Bruce Wayne, you kind of think he's a playboy, and then that's how he disguises himself that's why no one knows he's his Batman. As soon as you take that away, it made the character kind of almost make more sense. I mean, there's something about a person who would be able to delineate three incredibly distinct character types within their own life, well, personalities, and then just be able to switch them like an outfit at will. I mean, that's really way more sociopathic than someone who doesn't really have that much control over it and is compelled to put this suit on, and it's kind of out of his control a little bit.
The crew are aware that a Bruce Wayne who wears his trauma on his sleeve is more realistic than a character who can sociopathically delineate between three separate identities on the fly. That's cool, but he's still a man who brutalizes criminals in a bat-themed suit of armor while on rage-induced night prowls. Batman is a deeply psychological character, not only because of the themes of trauma and fear which permeate his stories, but in his understanding of scientific literature and psychological warfare. He is such a tormented and studied character that he has most certainly lost some of his humanity along his journey, and that's what makes him interesting. Justice League's portrayal of Batman was a bad joke, but there is one moment in there that did the character justice.
You got a team here.
Superman can bring this team together better than I ever could. His strength
doesn't matter how strong you are.
He's more human than I am.
YouTube has no shortage of reviews calling The Batman a masterpiece, Robert Pattinson's portrayal the best one out there, saying that the film perfectly encapsulates what Batman represents. Which gives me the distinct impression they haven't seen any of these. But they're animated, so they don't count, right? I already covered that smooth brain take in another video, so TLDR, no, they do count. I can see why so many people adore The Batman. I agree there are plenty of praiseworthy elements of its presentation. The brooding atmosphere and music, the rainy, sun-soaked environments, and performances that all lend themselves to the world's believability. The sequence of Bruce prowling Gotham streets, intercut with examples of the city's corruption and overlaid with his haunting narration, is probably the best intro for a cinematic Batman we've ever gotten. I'm glad I wasn't the only one to notice the sound of spurs as Batman approaches Penguin's toppled car, likening him to a sheriff about to bring a crook to justice. He doesn't, he just lets Penguin waddle back to his criminal enterprise unhampered, but it was a neat stylistic choice. Matt Reeves' creative vision can be felt throughout the project to such an extent that I'm more than willing to attribute its shortcomings to studio interference instead of the writer and director themselves. The climax is unnecessarily explosive and over the top for the tone of the rest of the film, and the lack of genuine detective work could very well be the result of a plot point checklist handed down from above. Yes, it is unique and novel and exciting, but nothing in the superhero movie industry is safe from corporate meddling. It is admirable what the Batman achieved regardless, but by no means is it the masterpiece some would have you believe. It clearly borrows inspiration from some of the greatest noir detective films to have released in modern memory, but the comparisons to David Fincher thrillers are shallow at best. The Batman uses the aesthetic of Seven and Zodiac to tell a story as deep as a 4chan radicalized incel Twitch streamer throwing his toys out the cot because the rich emo loner in his class doesn't see their mutually dead parents as a bonding opportunity. The Riddler goon saying, "I'm vengeance," is emblematic of a core problem with the Batman. This story does not respect the character. Instead of portraying an intelligent, collected, meticulous, driven, and thoughtful Batman, this character is obsessive, sequestered, emotionally unstable, and confused. His arc is learning that his sadistic strategy for crime fighting only further inflamed Gotham's struggle with crime by spawning copycat vigilantes who don't share in his vision of a better Gotham. It's not just that he's early on in his career, it's that he doesn't know what he's doing. When has that ever been true of Batman? That he is not aware, in control, and playing his cards carefully. This movie takes the myth of Batman and twists it out of shape. A shallow and cynical rendering of one of the most iconic superheroes in fiction history. I get it. It's noir. It's a detective story. It's grounded. But what does any of that count for when the film mangles its main character beyond recognition by reinforcing themes of helplessness and societal decay, stripping him of the agency necessary to advance the plot on his own terms, and saddling the sequels with the burden of bringing any catharsis to this story? The film leans away from everything heroic, inspirational, and mythic about the character, and leans into everything dark, psychotic, and pedestrian. A character who could be categorized in so many ways: a symbol of justice, an agent of change, a good-hearted but iron-fisted vigilante who intends to clean up the streets of his once great city, is, in this film, defined by ruthlessly assaulting street-level thugs in a blind rage and unwittingly galvanizing a cell of domestic terrorists to pursue their own agenda. What about that sounds like Batman? More like parody than homage. This story aims not to elevate and celebrate the character, but to test and criticize him. Batman 2022 is a dystopian reimagining of the character, released during a time of real-world demoralization and disillusion. The film is a product of its time in all the worst ways.
Matt brilliantly has crafted a Gotham for the 21st century. Our Gotham is very much in some ways like our America now. And so to the extent that our film reflects the contemporary, I just think is appropriate in whatever ways it does. And that, again, is a testament to the sharp pen or the sharp keyboard of Mr. Matt Reeves.
Strong, masculine, good men have been eroded from cinema at the same time that our real-world social and moral fabric has been reduced to tatters, leaving us with a Batman who is reclusive, unstable, and melancholic. A Riddler who is not only psychotically obsessed with riddles, but also a meek, insecure man-child who finds comfort and meaning in his online echo chamber of fellow radical rejects. And a story with little more to say than the main character could have done better.
You've got to do better, Senator.
As a film, it's competent. As a story, it's adequate. As an adaptation of Batman, I'm conflicted on whether it's more appropriately labeled as subversive and disrespectful to the source material, or a case of excessive creative liberties being taken in order to distinguish itself. It could go either way. For years now, the people with all the power and none of the passion have been painstakingly trying to remind us, our heroes are not worth admiration. They were never really that great to begin with, and their achievements can be replicated through cheap pandering and recycling visuals and lines which once held great meaning.
You just don't know when to give up, do you?
I can do this all day.
Haven't you had enough? Oh, I could do this all day.
This Batman is not clever or even competent. The plot does all the work for him. Batman doesn't care to wear the facade of a delinquent millionaire. He's too much of a cloistered weirdo to have the confidence to put on such an act. He's not in control of his emotions. He doesn't channel his anger and fear into a calculated crime-fighting campaign. He acts on instinct and impulse. The people in his way be damned. He is not thoughtful or deliberate, but misguided and unhinged. The film explicitly portrays a Batman who could not foresee the consequences of his absent-minded actions and must deal with them in real time, which would be a more plausible take on the character if not for everything else I've mentioned thus far. This is not the film we need right now, but it is the one we deserve. For prioritizing spectacle and themes over narrative coherence. For marginalizing stories about strong men in favor of critical, subversive propaganda pieces. And for disregarding the idea that stories, whether fictional in nature or not, should make sense.
Will you be my Batman? Sounds like Valentine's. Yes, say yes.